Hello, and welcome to my channel. If you are new to this channel, my name is Frank Zhu, and I'm a college professor teaching sociology, history, and philosophy. I'm also an award-winning landscape photographer. For many people, the act of stealing is wrong because, in their opinion, it violates ethical principles, breaks the law, and inflicts harm on individuals and communities. For me, however, the act of stealing is rather complex, and it takes an intellectual discussion to fully understand its complexities. In my opinion, several questions need to be raised and discussed before we can claim that every act of stealing is morally wrong and start punishing whoever steals for whatever they steal. First, can we apply the principle of what is wrong for you may not be wrong for me to the act of stealing? In other words, is it the case that some people may not consider stealing as wrong? Secondly, if stealing violates moral principles and breaks the law, whose principles are they? Who made the law that categorizes stealing as criminal behavior? Thirdly, shall we treat all kinds of theft the same way? For instance, is stealing a book just as bad as stealing $100? Finally, are there situations where stealing is morally justifiable or even encouraged? But let me start by introducing and explaining a moral theory, because the question about stealing is about morality, and it would not be a complete discussion without discussing some moral theory. The theory I'm going to talk about is called ethical relativism. If this term sounds new and abstract to you, don't be scared, because what it means is actually quite simple. It is a philosophical theory which holds that moral or ethical standards vary from person to person and from culture to culture. According to this theory, moral standards are all equally valid, and no one's opinion of right and wrong is really better than another's. The idea of this theory is often expressed by people in our daily life when they say, for example, "What's right for you may not be right for me." Or when they say, "It may be acceptable in your culture, but we don't accept it in our culture." It is based on this theory that some people made the argument that stealing is not absolutely wrong. It may be wrong for some people, they argue, but it may not be wrong for others. It may be wrong in some situations, but it may not be wrong in other situations. The theory of ethical relativism in one form or another has been a topic of philosophical discussions since ancient times. For example, the ancient Greek philosopher Protagoras famously said, "Man is the measure of all things." What he was arguing was that truth and morality were relative to individual perception and social context. This form of ethical relativism was also advocated by the famous ancient historian Herodotus, who wrote about different social customs and beliefs across different cultures. The opposite of ethical relativism is called ethical absolutism, which is also known as moral absolutism. It is the belief that there were universal moral principles which apply to everyone and which should be used to guide any human behavior. To put it another way, an action is inherently right or wrong, regardless of the situation or culture. Ethical absolutism was supported by religious beliefs, which dominated human thinking for a long time. Religious people believed that moral standards set by God were unconditional and absolute in nature. To put it another way, there were moral absolutes in the world that everybody must adhere to. In the study of philosophy, this absolutist point of view is known as divine command approach. This approach claims that an action's moral value depends on whether it is commanded by God, who has the absolute moral authority. In Christianity, for example, stealing is absolutely wrong because it is against one of the 10 commandments in the Bible, which goes, "Thou shalt not steal." Such divine command absolutism met few serious challenges until the late 19th century, when Charles Darwin put forward the evolutionary theory. According to this theory, human beings were not created by God, but evolved from animals. Also known as Darwinism, this theory questioned the creation theory of the Bible and helped free up human thinking. As a result, moral relativism reappeared and caught more and more attention in political and social sciences as well as in philosophy. Relativists have since proposed new moral concepts about what action is right or wrong. They insist that if it feels good, do it. More recently, as globalization became a reality, multiculturalism and pluralism became catchwords for relativists. Debates and discussions of any ethical issue became not only possible, but plausible. The topic of stealing, for example, became a subject of open discussions. One argument of absolutists against stealing was that it violated property rights. However, according to relativists, there was no such thing as private property at the beginning of human history. It was the hunting and gathering society at the beginning, in which people shared everything and everyone relied on everyone else for existence. As people settled down, acquired more skills and tools, and could produce more food, they no longer relied on one another. The concept of private property thus emerged. Those who had more property than others acquired more power and became the ruling class. As they became fearful of their property being shared by others, they created laws which would punish people who took away their property. Stealing thus became a crime. Besides, the rich and the powerful always control the mass media. They promote the idea that stealing is morally wrong. However, for those who had no property, stealing was never a crime. Therefore, supporters of ethical relativism argue that stealing is wrong for the haves, but it is not wrong for the have-nots. Ethical relativists also argue that the motivation of stealing varies from person to person. Stealing out of greed or malice should be condemned, but stealing out of necessity or desperation should be viewed differently. For example, it is not morally wrong for a father to steal a piece of bread for his starving child. Also, there is a moral difference in different situations, especially with regard to consequences. For example, stealing from a poor person is morally worse than stealing from a rich person, because the life of the poor person would be made more miserable, while the life of the rich person would not be affected so much. It is interesting to note that such relativist notion about stealing is also reflected in an old Chinese saying, which goes, "Stealing a book is not theft." What it suggests is that stealing a book should not be regarded as despicable as stealing money or other objects, because the motivation is different, and therefore it should be viewed from different moral perspectives. For some people, stealing books is not morally wrong because the desire to gain knowledge is never wrong. Instead, stealing books should even be praised and encouraged. On the other hand, those people who advocate moral absolutism insist on a universally recognized moral system. They argue that modern civilization was not built on a philosophy of relativism. There must be certain standards that apply to everyone in all circumstances. For example, creating a law and enforcing it suggests a fixed standard that everyone is expected to adhere to. That is why there are laws everywhere, regardless of different cultures and places. If everyone in any society really believed that right and wrong were purely matters of opinion and acted accordingly, then that society would fall into a chaotic situation where might makes right. Moral absolutists also argue that relativism is not and should not be accepted by everyone at all times. For example, female genital mutilation, while accepted and practiced in some cultures, is considered as extremely unethical and inhumane by people in most other cultures. Well, that is all that I wanted to talk about in today's short video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, thank you for watching this video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.